We're going to talk about real-time partials with Rails, maybe. I started this 2 weekends ago. I ate too many chocolate-covered espresso beans at like 9 o'clock at night and had a crazy idea, kind of prototyped it out. And results are kind of intriguing, but it's kind of putting this out there. I want to see what people think. Maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's a terrible idea, let me know. And you can check it out. It's Jim Sync, or here's the GitHub repo. So what I was thinking one night, I have a scaffolded Rails app here, just a user list. And I was thinking anytime we render a partial, wouldn't it be awesome just to say something like sync partial? So I started out thinking like, I want to go top down. So if I could say sync partial in the view here, and this collection of users would just update automatically when they change, that would be awesome. So then I went about figuring out how to do that. So we can sync in the view, and our controller, we gotta have some way to notify the client that these users have updated. So I thought maybe it'd be awesome if I could just say, hey, when you update a user, just sync that with the update action. And then everything would be handled under the hood automatically. So I ended up using Bay under the hood. So the only caveat is you have to be running a little rack app, but everything else is handled automatically for you. So I'll show that here. We just have a list of users, nothing special, edit, destroy. You can imagine these are maybe two different users on two different computers. If you watch user one over here, let's say I'm on this workstation on the right, and I'll say, I updated instantly on the left. And literally all we had to do was type sync on the view and then sync with the controller. So I got that far. I was like, this is awesome. What about destroy? So same thing in our controller. We can just say, hey, sync user destroy, and it should just remove it from the DOM in place. If we go back here, if you watch Chris McCord on the top left, that just disappeared from both of our screens. And that was just, destroy is just a link to user method destroy remote true. So it's just a standard Rails Ajax post. There's no JavaScript involved that we had to write. And the last thing I wanted to do was I had update and destroy. What about adding a new user? So if I create a new user, it should just show up at that whatever place in the DOM that I wanted. So I thought maybe it would look something like, I'm filling this API out. I don't really like this method, so maybe I could type sync new partial. I've actually copied this. So it wouldn't be awesome if I could just say, hey, sync new partial, and the resource is just going to be some new user. And right there in the DOM, you receive that event up in the DOM. So if we refresh, just say Chris, oops, another user, and it's happening. Oops, gotta refresh this guy. So both of our screens get updated, and then these also bind to the new events just automatically. So that's the gist of it. It's missing a lot. It's not backgrounded in a worker, so you have to post out the pay in process. Got 1 minute? 30 seconds. Okay. Well, some stuff's going on under the hood. I'm rendering script tags around each element that we're listening on. And I'm doing a DOM range query, so it doesn't actually affect any presentation. And it's listening on a secure signature, kind of security through obscurity. And that's where I'm at. I'd love to get feedback, get use cases, and maybe make it something that's an alternative to Ember or Backbone, even though they're awesome. So it's not a replacement, but maybe an optional alternative for progressive enhancement.
All right.
Where can we find that?
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Jim Sync, SYNC, or my GitHub username is Chris McCord, and it's on GitHub.
Hi, my name is Michael, and I work for Riot Games. We make League of Legends the most played PC game in the world. Does anybody play League of Legends? We love Chef at Riot, and I'll get more answers on this one. Who uses Chef? All right. Who has a Chef repo, like a repository? You probably cloned it from ops code. It's got your environment, some bunch of JSON files, some cookbooks, a bunch of stuff in it. And who has a Chef repo that's a junk drawer full of crap? especially your cookbooks directory in general for us, it seems like that's the one that was getting the most complicated. It had stuff coming from all over. Some of them were community site, random GitHub repos, some we wrote ourselves, but then abandoned, and then worse, the dependencies of all of those other things that are just laying around. And that's not surprising. That's been the way, that's sort of the best practice. That's what all the tutorials say. That's how ops code trains. And that's basically, this is the way it's been accepted. Maybe you're using Git submodules, which just makes it worse. You feel like it's better, but it's not. So we're software developers, and cookbooks look suspiciously like software, right? So at Riot, we started treating them like software projects. Who has a repo called code that they throw all their projects in with all their dependencies and config files and libraries? Right. That's a terrible idea, and so it's a terrible idea for cookbooks. So we've switched to having every cookbook as its own Git repository. Every cookbook has its own CI job that bumps the version, maybe runs Test Kitchen or other tests, and then uploads that to the Chef server automatically. And then every cookbook has a Burks file, which I'll talk about in just a second. So Burks Shelf is a tool we wrote. It's basically bundler for cookbooks. It has a Burks file. You can specify where to get various other cookbooks. It can use Git repos. It can pull from the community site over their API. Or it can look in the metadata file and just figure out what you need based on metadata. And it does it recursively, so it finds all the dependencies of the dependencies. So you get everything you need with one call to Burks install. And then you can turn around and do Burks upload and push all those to your Chef server. It's open source. It's one of the first things that Riot open sourced. It's at burkshelf.com and github.com/riotgames/burkshelf. We just released a new version that works with Vagrant 1.1 as a Vagrant plugin. So when you do Vagrant up, it checks your Burks file. It gets all the cookbooks that you need. It moves them into being available in the Vagrant instance. And so everything really just works, and it feels like you're doing software instead of collecting this junk drawer of stuff. Jamie Windsor, who's also on my team, did a longer talk on the same thing at the Bay Area Chef Meetup. If you're interested in seeing that talk, they recorded it. You can hit me on Twitter. And any of you who do play League of Legends, let me know your summoner name and I'll get you a Riot Graveskin. That's it.
Okay. So I've got a lot of stuff I'm going to try and compress in 4 minutes. I want to talk about CSS, CSS, and Parselet. I wrote CSS, CSS, and it recently released as a gem. So I'm Zach. Some information about me. I work at Harvest. We're hiring. Please talk to me if you're a Rails developer or a front-end developer. I'd love to talk to you about it. Great remote team. So refactoring CSS. This is how I feel whenever I have CSS and I'm trying to refactor, right? It is huge. You have to have everything in your mind in order to understand how it works. You break stuff. It's painful, right? So there's got to be a better way, and that's how I was feeling. CSS is simple. Right? So I wrote CSS, CSS. The best way that I could understand how to refactor CSS is to say, I have selectors. What are stuff that's shared? Just show me the stuff that's shared the most. And let me try and refactor that up with either a separate class or a shared selector that uses both. So this is my blog. This is CSS that I wrote for my blog. And this is CSS, CSS in action. So it's going through, it's parsing all of my CSS, and it's saying these two selectors share 5 rules. And these are the rules that are shared. And it goes through the whole thing. You can set a minimum. You can do JSON. That's real fun. It also does Sass. So if you want to parse your Sass, you can find out what shared stuff you're using for that. This is GitHub source. So you can also download a CSS file if you want to kind of publicly shame people. Now, that's CSS, CSS, okay? So how did I write this? I did not write Parselet, but I used Parselet. Now, CSS is just, it's just coming in as one big-ass string, right? And I'm actually parsing CSS. I'm using Parselet to do that. I'm not using regexes. I'm not using Antler or anything like that. I'm actually using pure Ruby code based off of this library, right? So what happens is I actually write Ruby code. CSS comes in. It goes to a parser. It gives me a Ruby hash. Some people might know this as an abstract syntax tree. It's a tree-like structure. Trees or hashes kind of stink to work with immediately, so I also write a transformer, which is another parselet concept. That hash gets giving out these OO classes. OO classes makes me happy, so that's how I'm actually able to check out the redundancy for this. I got about a minute, so let's see some code. So So this is CSS. CSS, this is all on GitHub. I'll show the link. This CSS parser itself is under 100 lines long. Parse CSS under 100 lines long in only Ruby, right? This is really easy to work with, and it's really maintainable. It's also tested, so all of my tests are in there. It's not perfect. I'm sure there are edge cases that I'm not catching here, but I can just create a test, fix the parser, and also have regressions on my other CSS tools. Let's see here. Go, 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 go. So, CSS is just a tool that I use in order to help clean up CSS. But Parselet is a greater tool that you can use to fix up code, not have to maintain gnarly regexes. Maintaining gnarly regexes is just about as bad as maintaining gnarly CSS. So hopefully it makes you feel like this into this. Way more badass. If you have any questions, feel free to pull me off here.
I know Kung Fu or Neo4j on Rails without JRuby. So let's start. Databases. You have key value stores like Redis, right? And Columnar, which is like HBase or Cassandra, Document, Mondo, or Couch. And then you have relational, which is what we're all used to, MySQL, Postgres, etc. So a graph database is somewhere at a more general purpose. It could be as general purpose as just a key value store, or it can be a document or columnar database. So it's in a sense, it's kind of like a superset of all these things. And when I say graph database, it's the way that the data structure is stored. So we have linked lists, trees, and then of course the more general purpose one is a graph database. So quick example, relational. You have users, you have interests, and then you have a ref table that's user interests. And what you do is, if you want to know what the user's interests are, you say, here's the user, look him up in the reference table, and then you find the interest rate, right? So if instead instead of relational, we thought of relationships, you spread these guys, you start here and you say, give me the relationships, the interests directly. Because see, the graph database focuses on the relationship between the data and not necessarily on the commonalities among values, like foreign keys and all that stuff, right? So this meshes very naturally with the way that we think about data. We think about our family as a family tree, of friends as a social graph, a social network, right? So moving forward quickly, this is a property graph, which has nodes, it has relationships, which are tied, and then it has properties on both. And that's the cool thing, because both things, the nodes and the relationships themselves, are first-class citizens. Moving on. These are just a few examples, not just social networking, first degree, second degree, and stuff like that. But you have all these things you can do with it in real time. In comes Neo4j. I don't work for Neo4j, but I'm wearing a t-shirt. Completely coincidental. Property graph. Whiteboard friendly. That means that if you can draw it on a whiteboard, then you can probably save it the same way in a graph. It's pretty cool. And then this is the important part for everybody. It has a REST API, so you can hit it with any language that you want to. It's written in Java, so that's a J, Neo4j, but you can hit it however you want to. Let's look at a graph. Whoa. So Neo needs to save the world by finding the key maker. So you say Neo knows the location of Morpheus. Again, her typed relationships. Who knows the location of the Oracle? Who knows the location of the Merovingian, etc. Right? Here are the values now because we have value pairs. Neo is a human. Oracle is a program, so it's a Merovingian. Who knows the location of the key maker who is held captive in a Windows server. All right, so here we go. You will create. This is how you create something. This is Cypher. This is it's like a SQL-like language. We can talk about that later, but so you create it this way. It returns that. This is how you create a relationship. Neo knows the relationship, knows the location of that, and you pass in the key value stored. Blah 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 blah. That's the list that comes back. So how do you do this with Rails? You have these gems. I know, 40 seconds. Neo4j, Neography, Architect Bar, and the best one is SchemeMaker, mostly because I wrote it. And so what's SchemeMaker? It's a multi-layer Ruby wrapper for Neo4j. Layer 1 interacts with the Neo4j REST API raw requests. Layer 2 binds those raw requests into Ruby objects. And then level 3 implements active model and fits the nodes in relationships as Ruby on. So here's a quick example. This is a program, right? Program in the sense of program versus human. Zoom in and enhance, here we go. Very normal stuff, right? Blah, 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 blah. Pay me later. Questions? Just kidding.
My name's Jordan Faust. I'm an apprentice developer at Cerner. I'm finishing up my senior year at UMKC here. I've been with Cerner right out of high school. I got an internship. I had 3 internships before I got asked to stay on with the team I'm currently on with, and that was 2 years ago. A couple questions. Who here has been an intern or apprentice? Who has worked with interns or apprentices? Okay, it's a good amount. I got the chance to talk with a panel at Cerner with students from Avila University. Cerner setting up a program to have an apprenticeship program with these students. They had a couple questions. One was, is getting started scary? And the answer is yes. We have a lot of things that we have to know as developers. Learning about tools. Git. We don't think it's that complicated, but you're never taught about that in school. And it's a very complex thing to get introduced to. On top of that, you have to know terminology. What's a decorator? How do you implement it? These are things that are very briefly touched in school, and most likely in a senior class. Learning methodologies. What is Agile? How to be Agile. Ruby is very good about test-driven development, but testing software is almost never touched in college. Where do you start was a major question I got from the students from Avila. My first suggestion was get involved in open source, and none of them knew what open source was. Here's the thing. Hire an apprentice. They're cheap labor. You get visibility at this university. They're going to talk about their work. They're going to enjoy it. They're more than likely getting paid a lot more than they would a normal job. And you overcome a very expensive learning curve before you're paying them salary. I have been with Cerner for a total of about 1 year and 3 months, condensed down to full work experience, 40-hour weeks. And they paid me a good amount, but nowhere near as much as if I was getting salary. And in this time, I've been able to overcome this learning curve, and I'm graduating in May, and I feel like I'm beyond that curve. And I think it'd be great if other companies start hiring apprentices.
Great. All right, I'm Kevin. I'm going to talk about dashboards. So most of you have probably seen or read Etsy's blog and have seen their post on the measure anything, measure everything. It's an awesome post. It just talks about how it's very important to measure everything so you have all this data with which to make better decisions. And they blogged about that a couple years ago. A year before that, the indie developer Panic, who makes Mac and iOS apps, blogged about their status board that they have at work. And this is a custom board that they created to show various stats on development and what they do. But they didn't open source that, and there's been some open source projects that came out that try to emulate this, but none of them really struck me as much as Dashing, which was open sourced by Shopify several months ago. And it hit Hacker News a week and a half ago, and was like the top story. And so I started playing with it, and it's pretty easy. You can see here the commands. You just have to install a Dashing gem. You create a new dashboard, which will create a dashboard that has a bunch of dummy data, and you go ahead and start it. And it's a Sinatra app. And so I've got one here that is basically just a, this is the sample dashboard that comes with it. I tweaked it very, very slightly. I just put the Ruby Midwest hashtag there. but it's intended here to run on TVs. So you have a custom dashboard for you. You can have just text, you can have a meter, you can have graphs, lists, numbers. That's like a little Twitter widget. But the cool thing about it is that you can extend this really, really easily. So you can create your own dashboards. You can reuse those existing widgets, but just swap out the data that's being supplied to the widgets. And so then this is a dashboard actually I'm working on right now for us at work for our team. And so this here I've got days until our next release. So we have 5 days left until our release. That current users, we use Splunk at work, so that's doing a real-time query to Splunk to see how many users are on the system right now. Now that number is actually 0 because it's the weekend and most of the team is here, but I put in a little dummy data there. How many JIRAs left do we have to close out for the release? So we have 13 JIRAs left, which is we're 95% of the way there. How many crashes in our app? This goes and hits Splunk as well. Anytime the app crashes, we have no crashes today. Because it's Saturday, no one's using the app. How many crashes, this actually goes out to Jira. How many crashes do we know about that are logged? Who's assigned to them? What's their status? How many days have they been open? Here's one that I just put in last night, which is just go to we use GitHub at work, so our Git commits, just to grab them and just display them on there. The empty spot right here is going to be our open pull requests, so we can see all the open pull requests that exist. So anyway, I encourage you to go check out dashing. It's really simple. It's really easy. I'm not that bright, and I was able to get something up very quickly. So go measure stuff and go visualize it. Thanks.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Cool. So in my talk yesterday, I mentioned content security policy, and I said I didn't have enough time to talk about it. I don't really have enough time to talk about it in 4 minutes. I'm going to try. So we talked about cross-site scripting. Just to refresh, cross-site scripting is a big problem on the web. It's when an attacker can take some script that's malicious, send it into your website, and then trick your website to sending it down to your user. And then because they are now running script that the browser thinks is your script, they have all sorts of privilege in the browser they shouldn't have. So that's cross-site scripting. The reason that works is because of the same origin policy. And the same origin policy means, when you're running your page can access everything on your domain, but you can't do the same thing with things on other domains. It's a really critical component to web security. The problem is it's difficult for a browser to distinguish between safe script and evil script. So it just has a page. It doesn't know how that information was pulled into that page, right? So if there's a script tag that an attacker injected, it can't distinguish that. So an example would be, what if there's an external script tag that points to api.google.com, so you can add the Google Plus button to your website. The browser will let you do that, but it will also let you add a script that points to evil.example.com, because it doesn't know the difference between those things. So there's a solution in content security policy that works by doing a source whitelist. Let me show you an example. So the header's either content-security-policy, or there's been some experimental versions, XYZ, CSP, it's all the same thing. But you're telling the browser that's where your resources can come from. So if you try, so here I've said self and cdn.example.com. So self just means whatever host it's running on, and then my CDN. So now if the browser gets a script tag that is not on the domain that the page was served from, or on the CDN, it's not going to run it. It's just going to throw a warning into the console. So this is kind of like the last stand against XSS attacks, right? You still need to do everything else that you're doing. You still need to use Rails protections and do everything you can to make sure that you're not sending script down. But if it gets through, this can save your ass. So that's why it's useful. It's not an alternative to other protections in addition to. You can do it for all sorts of resource types. Script is the biggest one, right? Because JavaScript is often the biggest problem, but it works for fonts, frames, XHR requests, all that stuff. There's a couple flags that are interesting: unsafe inline and unsafe eval. Unsafe inline, you can tell the browser whether or not you should allow any inline script. And like Code Climate, for example, we use CSP. We don't have any inline script, and we tell the browser that. So if we were ever to send incorrectly a inline script down to the browser, if the browser supports CSP, it won't run it. Same thing if an attacker tried to do that to us. And you can also turn off eval entirely, the evaluation of strings in JavaScript context. So get rid of your inline scripts. It has a report-only mode, so when you're testing this out, it can actually be a big breaking change. That's why not a ton of people are using it yet. But you can have it submit reports to your server when it finds things that violate the policy, so then you can get them on the back end and debug it. It's supported in, it's pretty new, right? So it's supported in browsers like Chrome, and those are stable releases beginning of this year, Safari since July. There's a gem that you can use to do this in Ruby called the secure headers gem. It can do a few other things, but mainly it wrangles content security policies. There's a couple browser quirks, and it will sort those out for you, so you don't have to worry about it. It'll send the right header, it'll send it in the right format. It's like Safari and Firefox take it in a slightly different syntax. You just declare, okay, in that bottom block, I have a CSP, I want to enforce it, and these are the places where that content can come from. For the source, the script, you can do the same thing for styles and everything else. This is actually the content security policy for Code Climate. It ends up being this gigantic header, and that's kind of like the running joke, is that when will the CSP header be bigger than the content itself? But it works fine. It works fine. This could actually be slimmed down a bit. You can set a default policy which will apply for everything, and you can set more specific policies. So if we whitelist Stripe, we whitelist Google Analytics. So you have to know about all your dependencies and use them, but if you need protection from XSS, this can be really helpful.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the most important Git commands that I just absolutely love. And I did a screencast on this also, and if you want to find it, it's on my blog, and that's kind of the long form version. So quick hands, who's using Git on a daily basis? Awesome. Who's using GUI tools as their primary way of interacting with their repository? That's okay. So everybody else is command line. So something that I often run into with people is they don't know about Git's patch mode. And I love patch mode because it can allow you to take a bunch of changes and split them out over across several different changes, or across several different commits. So this is kind of janky right here, but we'll just roll with it. So if I do git add -p, it'll drop into git add's patch mode. And right here I have two different changes, and the first change might be completely unrelated to the second change. So I probably want to keep a clean git commit history, so I don't want to put them in the same commit. So patch mode allows me to split these out and stage these hunks individually. So you'll see at the bottom there's a bunch of letters, Y, N, Q, A, D, everything else. You can hit question mark and see a quick list of what they all do, and you can check that out on your own. And the two that we'll be working with right now are split and Y and N. So split is Git's intelligent way of determining which hunks should be with each other based on white space. So the two changes that we had were separate by some white space, so it just hunked out this first one and it says, hey, this is a Git lightning talk. So we'll use Y to go ahead and stage that change, and we'll use N on this one. So if we drop back into Git status mode, we'll see that we now have some changes staged for our readme, and yet we still have some in our uncommitted area. So we can go ahead and commit that. Horrible commit message. And then we can drop back into patch mode and stage this other one. But so there's also, you can basically add -p to just about any command within Git and drop into this kind of patch mode thing. So if we wanted to do git checkout p, it'll do the same thing. And if we had some changes that we wanted to get rid of, like let's say we left some to-dos in there, and we wanted to completely get rid of them, we could just say yes. And now there are no more changes left in readme because we just checked them back out. We just reverted readme to the way it was at head. Yeah, so patch mode rocks. You can just add -p to anything and it just about works. The last piece that I want to talk about is git add interactive. And when you have a bunch of changes that or you have a bunch of files that aren't yet in Git, you need to use git add, right? Well, I see a lot of people come up here and copy and paste this or type the whole thing out. And that's just inefficient, right? So there's git add interactive mode. And it's kind of hard to see here, but Git has this add untracked. So you can hit A, and it will show all of the untracked files that are there. And you can just pass a bunch of numbers to it. So let's say we wanted to stage 2 and 3. You'll see a little asterisk come up next to it. So now we can drop out. And now we'll see that those two files have been added in just 3 or 4 keystrokes. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So happy getting.